Brought up the Supreme Court. The other big decision, of course, is health care. Several different scenarios there. How important is this going to be, do you think, ultimately in the race? If they strike it down, or if they uphold it, or if they strike down part of it? Where do we go from here?
Well, irrespective of what happens with the Supreme Court decision, which again is going to decide on the basis of the Constitution, what the Supreme Court is deciding is whether the law is constitutional, not whether it's a good idea or not. I think the debate about how to approach our health insurance problem in America will continue, because the health care law is currently structured is discouraging job creation and expansion of business in America. And so that issue will continue to be faced if the law is upheld. And if the law is overturned, Republicans, hopefully if we have the majority, and President Romney, are going to have to come up with an alternative, a way to replace what Obamacare does.
Would you like to see insurance guaranteed for people with pre-existing conditions?
Well, I think I've talked about the way to handle that. For example, people that are difficult to insure is through high-risk pools. There are ways to do that, but what I really would like to see for America is a vibrant private insurance market where individuals can buy insurance from any company that will sell it to them with the same tax treatment as their employers get, where companies can pool together with other companies to buy this insurance, where the consumer is in charge of health insurance, not just the employer structure that we have in place today.
Let me ask you a question about the economy and the fiscal cliff that's coming here in Washington, which are some big decisions about whether we're going to balance the budget. Would you use any money from closing tax loopholes, any new revenue that would come into the government, would you use any of that to pay down the debt?
But no one is in dispute that we need more revenue. The question is, how do you generate it? And that's the false debate.
Right, but my question is, would you use any of it to pay down the debt?
Well, I would use revenue from growth, which I think when you talk about loopholes...
But that wasn't my question.
No.
Any closing loopholes, because you know what I'm getting at, which is this idea of the tax pledge. Do you consider this raising taxes? If you close a loophole, you get new revenue to the government, you use part of it to pay down debt, maybe the majority of it to bring down tax rates.
I know, but I reject the premise of that. I think that's a false choice. I think that
other Republicans in the Senate don't think it's a false choice,
I think it's a false choice, and here's why. Because I think the issue here is growth, and that's a good thing, by the way, that I think both parties are now debating about. I think that we know what this election is partially about, and that is both parties agree that what we need is growth in America. It is the single biggest way. It's the best way to solve our debt problems, our unemployment problems. Now the debate is about how we generate growth. And the reason why I oppose tax increases is because I think they hurt growth. I think it's destructive to growth. But I think if we do tax reform, which would involve flattening the tax code, getting rid of certain exemptions that are in place today, you can do that in a revenue neutral way in the first year, but that would generate growth, and growth would generate revenue. And then you have to have the fiscal discipline to use that revenue to pay down the debt. So I think that growth is the only way to solve this problem, and I think tax increases would hurt growth. That's why I object to tax increases.
Well, I'm going to ask you about your political standing, and here's a surprise. I'm not going to ask you if you're going to be Mitt Romney's running mate. I'm not going to ask you that question. What I'm going to do instead is simply play this piece of tape from your last appearance here in May. If your party comes to you and says, look, you can focus on Florida, but in the fall of next year, we really need you on the ticket if we're going to carry Florida. Are you saying there's no way you'll consider it or do it?
Yeah, I won't consider it. I don't want to be the vice president of the United States. I want to be a senator, and I want to be a senator from Florida.
So under no circumstances would you serve on a ticket in 2012?
No, I'm not going to be on a ticket in 2012.
Under no circumstances?
Under no circumstances.
Senator, do you stand by that answer?
I thought you had told me you'd burn the tapes. Look, I'm not discussing the vice presidential process anymore. Right. I made the decision 2 months ago not to discuss it any further. I think, by the way, other people that have been speculated about are doing the exact same thing, and wisely so. I think Governor
Romney. But I'm not asking you to discuss. I'm just saying, do you stand by that statement?
I'm not discussing the vice presidential process.
You're not going to say whether that's still operable or not?
Here's what I can tell you.
You said under no circumstances, and yet you're obviously providing material to be vetted. So if it was under no circumstances, why allow yourself to be vetted?
Well, here's what I'll
save them time and money,
no, here's what I can tell you definitively, and that is that I am confident, based on his lifelong record of making good decisions, that Mitt Romney is going to make a great selection for vice president.
Let me ask you a couple of other things. Here's a headline in AP about some of the issues you write about in your book, some mistakes you say you made as Senator Rubio raises his profile. Will issues from his past hold back this GOP rising star? There's been talk about use of a party credit card, your friendship with David Rivera as a congressman from Florida who's still being investigated, was investigated by the state. Is there anything there from your past you think is a liability politically?
You know, I think your opponents want to turn anything into a liability. This show, as we speak, there are bloggers standing by their computers and fact checkers and others that want to use any word I say against us or in the future. That's just, and that's one of the things I discuss in the book, is how everything you do in politics, even if you may think it doesn't look look bad, will be, will be put together and packaged in the worst possible way in the future and be viewed through a lens very different from the one at the time that you're doing it. So what I talk about in the book is I have made decisions in the past that if I had a chance to do differently, I would. You raised the credit card issue. At the end of the day, I have a good explanation for all of that, but that doesn't mean that's the way it's going to be covered, and that's not the way it's going to be portrayed. I think there's a lesson there that in politics, especially the higher you go, perception is often reality, and you have to be sensitive to that when you're involved in politics.
You've hired people to kind of go through your record to make sure there's nothing embarrassing. Are you confident at this point that there's nothing that will emerge about your past in politics or personally that would be either embarrassing to you politically, or if you were to be on a ticket with Mitt Romney, that would cause a problem?
Look, again, on all that stuff, I wrote a book that I thought was a very honest appraisal of where I am and where I've been and the decisions that I've made. And the reason why I did it is pretty simple. There are other people out there that are my age, in their 30s at the time I was making these decisions. Maybe they're in politics, maybe they're in business, and maybe there are lessons to be learned from that. I've made good decisions, like everybody else. I've made bad decisions. I've learned from my bad decisions. I have always learned, like all of us do, from our mistakes. I wouldn't overblow them either, but I think it's important to point those out.
It's interesting, a lot of people may not have realized that you were a Mormon when you were younger. Your family was Mormon, and you've written about, and others have, that you sort of instigated the change to get out of the Mormon church and become Catholic. What brought that on? Why did you move away from the Mormon church?
Well, a couple things. I think it's important to point out I was 8 years old. I mean, at the time that our family went into the church, and as I talked about in the book, my mom, we moved to Las Vegas, and she was looking for a wholesome environment to raise our family. It's one of the things that, I know when people think of wholesome environment for the family, Las Vegas doesn't come to mind, but it was a much smaller town back then, and outside of the Strip, obviously. And we had family members, still do, that were very involved in the LDS church, and my mom was a big admirer of the family-friendly environment it created, and as I discuss in the book, that's why she moved us there. But for spiritual reasons, when I was about 12 years old, I started feeling called back to the Catholic Church, and it was nothing against the Mormon Church. It was just this calling that's happened twice in my life, and one of the aspects that I explore in the book is my faith journey, and I hope people will enjoy reading about that as well.
There's so many similarities between you and President Obama in terms of your political rise.
Hopefully in book sales, too.
Well, you've written a book like he did. Your ascent, as rapid as it is, has to be remarkable, and I'm sure you've looked to President Obama. I realize you're different ideologically, but what do you learn kind of positively and negatively from his very fast rise and your own as you're going through it?
And I've discussed this in other interviews and a little bit in the book. Obviously, I think like all Americans, his candidacy of 2008 was a historic one. I deeply disagreed with him on policy, but I understood the historic nature of his candidacy, and I understood politically how well organized they ran that campaign. I mean, just in terms of being a practitioner of politics, you watch the way they conducted that campaign with admiration, even though we have very strong disagreements about the policy positions that he took and has taken. I can tell you that when I was thinking about running for the Senate, I studied his Senate run when he was in 3rd place. I mean, he was not supposed to be the nominee for his party in Illinois, and I felt if someone like that can run and win in Illinois, then someone like me can win in Florida. But look, I think the one thing about the president that to me is personally disappointing, and I obviously don't know the president very well, is I thought in 2008, irrespective of where he stood on issues, he had a very unique opportunity to elevate American politics above kind of the normal fray where it had been before. I think he's abandoned that. I think he has now become just like everybody else in this town, where politics is about divide and conquer as opposed to hope and change.
Are you ambitious enough to believe that you can become the first Latino president?
I don't ever, and what I've really done, and I think hope the book captures this, is I've deliberately not tried to ever view any position I have as a springboard for another position. I think it's a recipe for self-destruction. What I do believe is if I do a good job in the Senate, if I'm a serious policymaker, if I take my time to put forward bills as opposed to, bumper sticker solutions like I've tried to do with this immigration issue, then I think 6 years from now I'll have a lot of opportunities to do different things in politics, outside of politics. My experience has been that if you do a good job at your job, you'll have other opportunities, including some you've never expected.
I tried to save the toughest for last. We have our own vetting process here as we try to get to know you better and help the American people get to know you better. And going through your book and understanding your interest in music, in rap and hip-hop, the critical question is East Coast or West Coast? Biggie Smalls or Tupac? Which is it?
I was more of a West Coast fan, I guess, from during that time. That distinction's gone away now, and we have our own Miami-based.
Well, we're the same age, so that's right.
I was more of a West Coast guy, and they'll probably hurt me on the East Coast.
There you go. All right, one last question. I'm thinking about basketball.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, in Florida today, who would get more votes, Obama Romney, or LeBron James?
I think, well, in Miami, probably LeBron James. Like everywhere else in America, unfortunately, there's still a lot of hate going on for LeBron and the Heat, but tough pill to swallow for them.
You can't be
proud of the Heat.
You can't be for him in Florida and still deal with Ohio. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Senator Rubio, thanks very much.
Thank you.